Labour Party are somewhat elusive to me. But you know, it's an
The
arrangement.
platform.
It's a
It's a vehicle.
platform, right?
Mhm.
It's a vehicle. And so one problem is that the parties don't really stand for anything. There's
Mhm.
not an agenda of growth, an agenda of development. The other part of that is because there's a transactional party system, there's no coalition for growth. You
Mhm.
know, Stefan Durkheim, who I believe you spoke to earlier, has this great book, Gambling on Development, and he just
Yep.
talks about bargains. And there's some people are familiar with the political settlements approach of Mushtaq Khan and some of the folks in really focused in the UK, but it's all the same kind of conversation. It's how do
Mhm.
you get a coalition for growth?
Yeah.
Um, and that would mean not just the Nigerian Economic Summit Group having their, you know, polite annual event where they have their platform and their communique and they get some nice speeches and a few civil servants show up and everybody is you know friendly and happy. But like a real process of uh, bargaining between the
Mhm.
public sector and the private sector, with the public sector, the government saying, we want electricity,
Yep.
we want petrochemicals,
Mhm.
we want a good road network, we want results from you. And the private sector is saying, that's fine. Here's what we need. We need this tariff in order to make the power grid work. We need this regulatory framework in order to invest in petrochemicals, and so on and so forth. And so
Yeah.
there can be a bargain. There are examples of this in Taiwan, public-private sector, sectoral groups. There was a massive effort in South Korea in 1974, the Heavy Industry and Chemicals Plan where they sat down all the big business leaders in the chaebol, the conglomerates in South Korea, and they said, okay, we want ships, steel, cars, electronics. We want it to be world class. We will subsidize you and give you loans. We will give you protection for a few years, and then you're going to export. You're going to be competitive in export markets. And if you do it, you'll get awards and you'll get bonuses and you'll be rich because your companies will succeed. And if you defect and steal the money and take advantage of the opportunities or the protection just to collect rents, you might end up in jail, or at least
Mhm.
we'll nail your companies. You'll be taxed. You'll be regulated. Um, you won't be happy.
Mhm.
And so there were clear incentives and sanctions.
Mhm.
In France, there are sectoral competitiveness groups in cars and other areas where competitiveness groups in cars and other areas where, you know, public officials with specialist responsibilities talk to the car makers. What do you need in order to make better French cars and export them?
Mhm.
And this is doable in the Nigerian context, but
And
in,
has been done,
yeah,
has been done in the past. Between 60 and 66,
yeah,
Michael Opara in Eastern Nigeria did the same thing.
yeah,
He
yeah,
built that, just bond between the political class and the economic class,
right.
and they worked together and drove the economy of the region to one of the fastest in the world in those short years. So it is
They also
possible.
had a great agricultural extension service, you know, so
Exactly.
there were institutions in place to advance these goals. What do we see in the contemporary era, though? We see the Nigerian government trying to grab $8 billion from MTN. We see the Nigerian government telling Dangote, "Well, we're not really sure if your product is you know quite up to snuff." You know,
Exactly.
compared to like the great NNPC product, which we all know is world standard. I'm being sarcastic. You know, I mean, the point is, the point is, I'm not saying that everything Dangote does is perfect or everything MTN does is perfect. But instead of just grabbing and obstructing, why don't you bring these movers and shakers? Telecoms is 13% of the Nigerian economy now. Oil is about 6% of the Nigerian economy. Bring the telecoms people up. Bring industrialists like Dangote up. This is what India has done. This is what Indonesia did. And I realize there are questions of monopoly and competition and so forth. But if people are producing and investing and creating capital and forming capital in your economy, at least figure out a way how to guide them, encourage them, and support them, and create a partnership with government.
And I want to come to India that you just mentioned because I know you're doing a lot of work on that. But why would the political class do this? Why would the political class care about building the economy if, I mean, turkeys don't vote for Thanksgiving, rams don't vote for Salah, right? Isn't it that there needs to be some kind of external pressure? By external, I mean external to the government. It could be from the people, some pressure, some some sense that the people can't take it anymore for the political class to then look for answers. On their own, it's hunky-dory. Why bother? Who wants to put in hard work? Do you agree with that? Or do you think there's that on their own? And have we seen where people on their own just decide, and this is not a Singapore discussion, just decide to do right by their people?
Look, from 1966, with a small break, to 1999, we saw what the military could deliver. Okay? So we had that experience. From 1999 to 2024, 2025, we've had an elected government, an electoral regime. It's a call it a democracy, call it an electoral democracy. People can have their opinions about that, but we've seen the limits of what they can do. And so there has to be some kind of change within the system. And so what I'm saying is not, oh, okay, the civilians have had their time and let's go back to the military. The military, find me a military government in Africa since 1956 who has substantially developed their economy. If you show me that, then maybe we can talk about the military option. But I don't see it.
Yeah.
So the question then becomes, what kinds of politics within the Fourth Republic could change things? I'll just say, without making any partisan statements, that I'm really intrigued by what happened in the last election cycle, pardon me. That the fact that you could have an insurgent candidate that garnered so much enthusiasm, got a substantial youth vote, got a substantial amount of energy and excitement in a very short campaign season, and really gave the two major parties a run for their money, shows the pent-up frustration that people have. And speaking from the United States, I am seeing that in our own election system.
Yep.
I don't think it's necessarily so. I'll be partisan about my own country and say I don't think it's necessarily such a positive thing, but people are angry and they voted for a quote outsider insurgent candidate who would shake things up, and I think we'll see what they get. But
Yeah.
the point being that there are the two major parties in Nigeria are kind of tapped out, and there is a possibility for some kind of change. And so that would be one kind of one option in the Nigerian context. The other question about the politicians is, yeah, no, by themselves, unless the incentives change rapidly, they're just going to keep circulating. There's going to be 75% turnover in the National Assembly every 4 years because the parties want to give spoils to a wider audience or a wider array of people. They're going to all be grabbing rents. They're going to be getting contracts. They're going to be doing deals. They're going to be sidelining allocations, and you're going to get the same thing. What's striking to me, and maybe members of your audience will have a better fix on it than I do, is this is a current project I'm working on, but we've had 25 years of the Fourth Republic, which is an impressive milestone in Nigerian history. We also have approximately 110,000 fatalities from Niger Delta, Boko Haram, herders and farmers, banditry. Public order has collapsed in Nigeria. The essential characteristic of the state that Max Weber identified, the monopoly on the legitimate use of force, is at least at risk in Nigeria. If not, it's not a failed state, but it's certainly a state with tremendous challenges in that sphere. And in some contexts, including Indonesia, including Brazil, including Malaysia, the and South Korea and so forth, the threat of either an external military challenge or domestic instability and insurgency or something like that was enough to galvanize the attentions, focus the attentions, and galvanize the energies of the political class. We've got to do something to stabilize the countryside. We've got to do something so that average people have a stake in the system, because otherwise we've got this communist insurgency or civil war or North Korea trying to invade us. So there was a security imperative that focused people's attentions. And what disturbs me and troubles me in my conversations with my friends and discussants in Nigeria is when I talk to politicians and a lot of policymakers, it's like, oh yeah, ISWAP, Boko Haram, the jihadists, they're all up in Lake Chad. Mend and the Avengers, they're all down in the creeks. Yeah, nothing that I can't solve by just having an armored vehicle and a couple of military escorts when I go to my village, and a hired fence around my house. And that is not a way to think. And it's not a way to by privatizing security and personalizing security, it's not a way to move the country forward. So my hope is, I certainly am not happy about the disorder in Nigeria, but my hope would be that it would get through to a few key decision makers and politicians that the way out of this mess of disorder runs its way through the political economy. And the final point to make about this is a comparative one. Another large federal diverse democracy, India. India had their decade of disorder in the 80s and the 90s, multiple assassinations, ethnic riots in the major cities, a huge two insurgencies in Kashmir and the Naxalite rebellion, but Marxist rebellion in the east. All the indicators, and they have better statistics than Nigeria, but all the indicators in terms of crime, in terms of ethnic violence, in terms of insurgency, were going up and up and up for, a long time. Since the installation of Nigeria's Fourth Republic in that period of the last 25 years, India's numbers have consistently been going down. All of them. Less crime, less ethnic infighting or communal violence, less insurgency. What else has been happening in India? Well, you've got, again, cross currents in terms of politics and a kind of illiberal populist regime in there now. But one other thing has been happening in India. They've had the fastest per capita economic growth of any country or region in the world, practically. Certainly South Asia, at 5% per capita, a staggeringly rapid reduction of poverty and increase in economic prospects. And I don't think that's accidental. So if Nigerian politicians could find a way to get together and jumpstart growth, I think they would find themselves in a much more stable position in terms of security in the next few years.
Fantastic. And we'll open it up for audience comments, questions. Please use the Q&A tab to post your questions, not the chat room. It's difficult to scroll through the chat room, but just put it in the Q&A tab, and I will ask the questions and give full attribution, to the person who posted. But Peter, I know, this little mention you did of India is the subject of your next book. So number one is, do we have a date, publication date? But more importantly, what is the critical difference, between Nigeria and India? What is it that helped India to drop all their adverse numbers and, drive this massive growth that we're seeing currently?
Well,
Differentiating the difference between India and Nigeria.
on the book, it's always dangerous for an author to make predictions. I expect completion of the manuscript early next year. I have a contract, and so I hope it'll appear next year or early in 26. But it'll be in the public domain and available soon.
I will bring you back to discuss it on this platform.
I'll be happy to do that.
Excellent.
You know, that's another question, and maybe the subject of another book to look at India and Nigeria. But I see a few things. One is India does have one powerful institution, which is a very capable bureaucracy. That was an inheritance from the colonial era that was quite distinctive between India and many African countries. So a very extensive and well-developed bureaucracy. Number one. Number two, a fairly stable party system with some long-standing issues of ideology, doctrine, programs that are distinctive. And a third element is a very powerful, or an increasingly powerful, business class that is able to, bargain with government and really deliver results. And so India had a very socialist, they used the language of socialism, and they had a very socialist state-dominated, state-led government until about until the early 1990s. And then they began a process of liberalization. It wasn't one of these structural adjustment programs imposed by the World Bank and the IMF. It was more homegrown, but it's been a process of liberalization that's now 30 years old. And it has yielded results. And so the argument here is not for a neoliberal, purely market-driven, open economy. You can have heterodox strategies and policies, but the argument is for enabling aspects of the market and how to politically structure market-driven growth, and that has worked in India, I think.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So I have a question from Chugo Ayaji, and he says, Professor Lewis emphasizes the importance of milestones, tipping points to drive institutional change. What qualifies as a milestone in this context? Could events like the October 2020 protests, and I guess he's speaking about the End SARS protest, or widespread demonstrations, maybe even the good governance demonstrations, be considered milestones? Why did the finance bill protest succeed in Kenya but failed in Nigeria? And this is the good governance protest. And what steps are needed to reach such a pivotal milestone for meaningful institutional reforms?
That's a great question. Individually, I don't think NSARS or the other protests are milestones. Collectively, I think that the protests and the obedient movement in 2023 represent a gathering of forces that could create a tipping point. Critical junctures don't happen all at once, but in David and Ruth Collier's account of critical junctures in Latin America, it comes out of the labor movement, it comes out of changes in the party system, and so it might be years in the making, but then at a certain point you get a new bargain. I think in Nigeria's experience, and I'm talking about this somewhat in my book as well, you've had sort of three big bargains. One bargain was the independence bargain of 1959, where different groups came together with the British to agree on independence and power sharing. Then, after the Civil War, you had a new bargain, which was less formal but no less decisive, which was national stability, national unity. And so then you had a decade of federalism and revenue sharing in the oil economy and distributive politics to try and create a sense of social peace and create a sense of shared prosperity during the oil boom. And some of those mechanisms, electoral mechanisms, state creation, all those kinds of things have persisted in Nigeria. Then you had a third bargain, which took a long time to come to fruition. It started in 1979, which was the democracy bargain. And then the Second Republic failed, but then the Third Republic has lasted. So you had a bargain around democracy. The problem with the bargain around democracy, as we've been talking about for the last hour or so, is it didn't include economic development. It included how do you get from one election to another. So we've had seven election cycles, and even a turnover of parties and the presidency through electoral means in 2015. But development has been lagging. So the question then becomes what kinds of pressures, the question you're asking, which is a good one, what kinds of pressures from below can create the conditions for a sea change. I think part of what happened in Kenya, which was so important, was that the protests were led by the essential part of Ruto's coalition. He rode the wave of, youth enthusiasm and kind of, bootstraps, self-made, young entrepreneur.
Hustler Nation, he calls it.
Sorry?
He calls it
The
the
Hustler
Hustler
Nation.
Nation.
Thank you. Thank you. That's exactly right. He rode this slogan of the Hustler Nation. But when the hustlers take to the streets and say, your policies are not viable, they're damaging us, and we reject them, that's a real problem. The problem in Nigeria, or the difference in Nigeria as I see it, is no, the substantial social movement and youth movements that particularly were in the End SARS movement, they didn't have a claim to a special segment of the parties or party support. In other words, they couldn't make claims on the politicians and say, look, we put you in office. APC, you're going to go down if you don't listen to the End SARS folks. Nobody could say that. They could hit the streets, but at the end of the day, it was a notable social protest. It did have some resonance in terms of maybe Buhari's, at least cosmetic policies around policing and so forth. But at the end of the day, they couldn't claim to be an essential part of the coalition. So social movements can have a certain resonance and a certain leverage, but they have to be able to, what would I say, politically threaten the politicians in order to really be able to make effective change. And so, again, the way that SARS then fed into the obedient movement is a very interesting development. And so what you're pointing to is a potential tipping point, a potential critical juncture if all of that youth energy and all of those those political aspirations on the part of this constituency can find a platform in a party
Exactly.
and a candidate.
Can I build on this comment? In fact, let me replay two comments in the comment section and then ask a question following on to your comment. So there's a comment from Ambassador Joe Keshi. He says, I agree with Peter about how institutions change or fail to change. The problem is that those involved do not often recognize the need for change or the need to re-energize their institutions. There's a second comment from Monty McMurky. The late Signaturetv, the great Nigerian poet writer, remarked, a functioning, robust democracy requires a healthy, educated, participatory followership and
Hmm.
an educated, morally grounded leadership. So we get these, right? The challenge is, again, back to the how. How
Hmm.
do we get the leaders to re-energize or understand that they need to drive reforms or re-energize reforms in their institutions? And I think, let me throw out an idea and see what you think about it. Many of the development agencies, the open society type, push for this good governance thing, right? Good governance, which I see as, just snipping around the edges, trying to prune an infected plant versus probably a more activist involvement in encouraging civil society organizations to civil disobedience, right? Some kind of support for civil society to just aggressively drive civil disobedience. And it is that fear of what this civil disobedience could lead to that could be the impetus the leaders need to drive them towards reforms. How do you respond to that proposal?
Well, okay, so that's interesting. So top down versus bottom up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think bottom up is helpful for one aspect of the problem, and top down is helpful for the other aspect of the problem. Bottom up, NSARS, anti-corruption, you know, uh, we want proper educational facilities, give us public goods. Those are the kinds of big demands that bottom up mobilization is going to deliver. Um, but it's rarely the case that popular mobilization and bottom up demands have a good model or a worked out framework for delivering on these things. I mean, think about, I don't know, the civil rights movement in the United States, um, end Jim Crow, end segregation, provide equality. Those were the demands of the civil rights movement. But it was ultimately politicians, LBJ in particular, who came up with the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and provided the institutional framing that fulfilled some of those expectations. We're still fighting that struggle, and we all know that that's an ongoing process. But the point is that there was massive, sustained popular pressure from the late 50s through the mid 60s, years of protests and boycotts and violence, and nonviolent, consistent, disciplined, nonviolent mobilization on the part of the civil rights movement, a threat of background violence from some other groups. It was a roiling, a popular social movement. Um, and ultimately, it also prompted a policy response, which at least fulfilled some specifics. But there's another problem, Patrick, in this, and I'm glad you brought this up because I thought we'd come to this, this good governance framework. Um, Listening to our conversation today, a lot of people might think, oh yeah, Lewis is just saying, well, you need good governance. And good governance, I mean, take, I'm just going to say, without, without any implications about individuals, and you'll know this, you'll recognize this. Take the worst of the worst in your mind among Nigerian politicians, and that person can be quoted as saying good governance is essential for
Yeah.
Nigeria in some speech and some public saying, take the best of the best, and they'll say the same thing. So it's a kind of a meaningless thing. And this good governance framework has been popularized over the last 25 years, 30 years or so. It's part of the Washington Consensus. So
Mm-hmm.
it becomes delegitimized in some ways as part of a kind of neoliberal, oh, it means liberal democracy and free markets and all this kind of thing. Good governance has become a buzzword that's sort of stripped of meaning. And particularly if we interpret it to mean a kind of top-down, externally monitored, externally modeled, um, uh, full transformation of the governance space. So low corruption, civic mindedness, careful policy selection, capable institutions across the board from the lowest level of the civil service and all the agencies and so forth. And what people like Durkin and even Acemoglu and Robinson and others, notably Matt Andrews at Harvard and Lant Pritchett have focused on. Brian Levy, who taught with SAIS for a number of years. They all focus on the same thing. David Booth, Tim Kelsall, good enough governance. What is
Exactly.
good enough to get
In our
you?
context, in our
Yeah,
context. Yeah.
exactly. It's so, and the related element or the related idea that goes along with good enough governance is things that David Leonard, Michael Roll, David Booth have talked about, pockets of effectiveness. So if we think about Nigeria, the National Communications Commission took Nigeria from zero cell phone service and almost zero penetration of telecoms because there were 300,000 landlines in a country of 150, 130
50
million
million
people
people.
in 1999 to
Correct.
basically 100% cellular penetration today. Everybody has
Yep.
access to a cell phone, and most people have access to the internet through their cell phone. So we have almost universal internet and cell phone access in a very rapid period from about 2002, 2003, really through about 2015, when it really just surged, because they got one institution right, one department or office right. If we could clean up the Ministry of Finance, uh, the central bank, and most importantly, the NNPC and its successor units, and the petroleum economy, and get those running with some degree of integrity and effectiveness, uh, it would transform Nigeria. If we could solve the problem, and I know this has been a lifelong commitment of yours, if we could solve the problem of electricity provision, it would completely jumpstart Nigeria. It's a binding constraint, as Danny Roderick would call it, a binding constraint on Nigeria's development. If there was suddenly widespread, consistent electricity access, it would revolutionize the country. We all
Exactly.
know this. And so pockets of effectiveness is what you find in Brazil, is what you find in Indonesia. There's corruption, there's inefficiency, there's rent seeking, there's all kinds of the standard problems that we talk about. Self-dealing, rigged elections, police violence. They've got problems, these countries, in varying degrees and varying problems. But they've been able to develop sufficient centers of effectiveness to provide good enough governance so that they can get 7% growth or 5% growth and poverty reduction.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. So I have a question from an anonymous attendee. Building a coalition for growth entails shared vision. Do you think the multi-ethnic nature of Nigeria is a hindrance to building this coalition, considering that our interests are skewed along different outcomes?
I don't believe that that's a hindrance. I know that there is along anybody who knows Nigeria, and certainly most of the audience here is Nigerian, knows that uh, ethnic diversity at the national level has been a hindrance to a shared vision of development and a shared vision of growth. But I think there's a much more widespread and prevalent realization, let's call it that, among Nigerians that you can pursue a regionalized or zonal structure of growth that could easily work. Um, I was in some discussions with people around the Economic Summit Group, and we did some scenario building sessions. This was years ago, and people were asked this question, you know, do you think that ethnic diversity or regional diversity in Nigeria is a hindrance to growth? And they said, no, it's, the North, think about the old agricultural economy of Nigeria. The North was growing groundnuts and cotton. The Southwest was growing cocoa and some palm products, and the East was doing palm
Rubber.
products mostly.
Hmm.
Um, they had complementary economies. They could trade with each other. If we think about the North being a breadbasket, if we think about the South being, or the Southeast being an industrial energy complex, if we think about the Southwest and its contemporary leading role in Nigeria's economy as a diversified industry, shipping, logistics, all kinds of things that could, and telecoms come out of the Southwest. You could imagine uh, a zonal development program that would work. I had a friend in 1999, a banker from the East, although he had his career in Lagos, who sketched for me on a napkin. This is how we develop the country. You do, logistics in Port Harcourt and Lagos. You do petrochemicals and petroleum in Wari and so
Mhm.
forth and so on and so forth. And he just sketched, and here are the trunk lines and the linkages. It was a brilliant vision of what the country could be. And so unified, universal, common development where every part of the country takes a step forward at the same time, that's not going to happen and has
Mhm.
never happened anywhere,
Mhm.
from the smallest countries in the world to the United States.
Mhm.
But shared prosperity based on regional distinctiveness, I think that's possible.
Let's see if I can get in maybe two more questions. I
Sure.
have one from my producer, Chidima Obi, and she says it's a question on institutions and Darren Acemoglu, James Robinson's thesis on institutions and the criticisms of that thesis that it does not explain the rise of China, right?
Hmm.
Um, what's your view on that? China looked inwards, they did it their own way, and they grew. What's your view on institutions, and must we all follow that line, or is there an alternative pathway?
Well, I mean, I think there's an alternative pathway if you have 1.2 billion people in a communist party, um, uh, and a communist party building on a 3,000-year imperial unifying agenda. So if you find me another country in the world that fulfills those requirements, then that's an alternative pathway. For the rest of us, we have to sort of figure out what to borrow from that.
Mhm.
So it's a great question, and it is certainly true that Acemoglu, Robinson, Johnson make this path dependence argument, especially the idea of uh, institutions of capital or inclusive institutions versus extractive institutions, which are often implanted by external actors and so forth. Um, China was, for all practical purposes, an ex-colonial economy in 1949. It had been occupied and colonized by Japan. It had been dominated by the UK for over a century. So it had a de facto kind of colonial structure. But then, if we talk about critical junctures, the communist revolution in China was a critical juncture. I mean, it was a massive upheaval of society and institutions. It was tragically, a very costly uh, set experience in terms of the loss of life. Perhaps 30 million people dying of famine and other causes, particularly during the Great Leap Forward, and also a great loss of life during the Cultural Revolution. But um, it did rest upon the Chinese Communist Party's seizure of the levers of the state, domination of and appropriation, if you will, of some of the strengths of the former imperial state that had been built up over thousands of years, enabling them to reach down into the very grassroots of each village and all of the agricultural networks, all the cities, and so forth. And so, with that centralizing top-down capacity, it was possible for Chinese leadership to remake certain aspects of state and society, build up infrastructure first, and then liberate, I would say, the economic energies of Chinese people after Deng Xiaoping in 1978 and in the early 80s. And so there are alternative paths, and I think I could go on, but I want to get to the last question. There are lessons to be learned from China, but just keep in mind, again, when we think about institutions, the independent judiciary, lack of corruption, all these things that we associate with good governance, China has none of those things today. It's a patchwork of, different systems. There's local level corruption. There's not an independent judiciary or kind of uniform rule of law. There's a lot of diversity and contradictions in the Chinese system. But they have good focus on meritocracy, reasonably secure property rights for smallholding, business owners, reasonably predictable macroeconomic conditions, and look what happened. 10% growth rates for 2 decades, plummeting poverty rate, the world's workshop. It can be done elsewhere.
Exactly. Let me get this question in. We're like 3 minutes to the end.
Okay.
It's another question from Chugo Ayaji, and he says, how would you compare the educational and political capabilities of post-colonial leaders in Indonesia and Nigeria, particularly Suharto's leadership versus his Nigerian counterparts, and their impact on nationals? Indonesia's experience seems to challenge this. Question about educational and political capabilities of post-colonial leaders, and should we expect to see a contagion from the military coups in our region?
Well, I mean, on the last one, there's been a lot of people. I just came back from the African Studies Association. Patrick was also there. There's been a lot of discussion about the wave of coups in Francophone West Africa over the last 2 or 3 years. They're all in Francophone countries. They're all, except for Gabon and Guinea, they're mostly in countries that are also highly unstable and facing big jihadist insurgencies. They're also in countries where political leaders, elected leaders, fundamental political and democratic, rather, norms and guardrails by term limits and internal politics and so forth. So the takeaway is that most of these coups have happened for individual reasons. Gabon's coup and Guinea's coup are not Mali's coup. And Burkina Faso and Niger had their own dynamics. There's a more permissive environment across the continent with the AU and so forth, and so the norms are weakening a bit. But I don't expect that this is an inevitable wave that's going to consume all of West Africa. And I think there would when I say that, because we all know the history and we all know that we could be proven wrong very quickly. On education, it's a real technocrats that engineered the Indonesian economic turnaround had a nickname. They were all called the Berkeley Mafia. And so it gives you a sense of they all went to UC Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, or University of California, Davis in the late 1950s, early 1960s. And they were young economic graduates with PhDs, and they were called back by Suharto to sort of form a leadership cohort to try and turn around the economy. And so they had good US, whatever, PhDs. But I've gone back and looked at some of the early finance ministers and the super perm secs They all had Ivy League degrees. They had
Exactly.
good, they weren't all PhDs, but that doesn't matter. They all had good academic training. They were elites. And so I don't think that the quality of technocrats or the quality of education is the deciding factor here. I think that I've interviewed most of the super permanent secretaries, and I've known some of them for a long time. And I think they had an agenda in the 60s that if they had had the right kind of political backing, might have, taken the country farther forward. Murtala Muhammad had other ideas, and he basically sacked them in 1975 and put together a different agenda. So and taking it forward today, I'll just say Nigeria has a super abundance of capable people to take the country forward. That the talent, either at the elite level or even at the sort of general level, is not the issue here. It's the political issues and the political questions that we've been talking about.
Sadly, we've run out of time, but this has been a fascinating conversation. Peter, thank you so much for your time and for sharing with us.
It's been a pleasure. Great to see you, Patrick, and great to talk to your audience.
Excellent. And this also brings a close to all our conversations for 2024. We had 23 great speakers. You're closing it out for us. Over the Christmas break, we'll announce our lineup for next year. And, we thank our audience for being very supportive. And we hope that you join us again when we restart in the new year. So thank you, everyone, and have a fabulous holiday. Bye now.
Thanks.
New every morning on Signature TV, we open the day for you with needed energy, information, and required vibes to shape your day. From sizzling snippets of stories in various areas of life to intriguing conversations with net worth guests.
When you have people who have no track record becoming your leaders, you have a problem. There's no outstanding gratuity when Obi took over from me. I left in all the accounts of Anambra State 13.8 billion for him.
Your day cannot be complete without Signature Morning on weekdays and Signature New Day on weekends. There is no better way to start your day except Signature Morning and Signature New Day every day on Signature TV.
Welcome again to Muse on Signature Television. Signature TV is coming live to you on channel 265 of SLTV, and of course on all social media handles you can think about. Unless the one is new, Signature TV is on all social media handles. My name is Christian Chibuzo Maduka. I don't know whether it's by what they call it, by election or by selection, or do we say by intimidation, I've been made to be your chief anchor person on news. Well, take me the way I am, according to the hymn book of the Protestants. They say, take me the way I am. And pardon me if I am your sitting rooms, you find me unwelcome, and please just bear with me. It will last just a brief second. Allow me to think and talk. I'm sure you're also thinking and talking, because a lot of things that are happening in this country and the world at large affects all of us. So once in a while, we pull out, sit down one place to think and talk about few of them, just like I'm going to do from here. Welcome, and bandits and terrorists, bandits and terrorists, and that's it. While voter registration exercise is being prepared to be cleaned up, nobody factored in those people who have died and they are never going to appear in the voter register. And INEC is doing this for politicians in Nigeria who want in 2027 to contest either to be returned in the different positions at either at the state houses of assembly, even in the councillors of local government, chairmen of local government, governors. You know, some people are going for federal houses, and some people are going for Senate, the Red Chamber. Some people are even contesting to go for President of the Republic of Nigeria. Are they factoring, when INEC clean up his records, where are those who their names are not appearing in the records again? What happened to them? Have we asked ourselves? But that's life. They will see before, and the INEC will be busy cleaning up. If your name is not there, that's by the way, nobody remembers you. And something that reminds me about all those, if you are thinking from Borno, the number of people killed on a daily basis, you come down to Zamfara, you go down to Benue, go to Kwara recently, go to Niger State, I keep calling Niger Report, whatever, but Niger State in Nigeria, Benue, Plateau, and all those states of Nigeria where killings are being done. Is the INEC thinking about how to stop so that they won't find more jobs? Because if more people name are not appearing on your voter registration, you have more job to do. I'm just thinking and talking. The next thing to think and talk about is INEC is busy going to clean up voters register. Has INEC cleaned up the voting, the electoral process of Nigeria? And somebody will say it's not INEC's problem. But wouldn't INEC be concerned that if they finish election in polling booth and they transmit results so that they will begin to gather whatever they can and go home safely? Because once they have the result with them, they are prone to risk. You remember those days where INEC officials will pursue thugs and armed men will pursue them. They were dragging voters' the election box or voting boxes, and they were dragging. Some of them were scattered, and the voters votes wasted, and they burnt. Even some of the polling booths are burned down, destroyed, and election officials will run for their safety. Has INEC planned about cleaning such things? Because, like my people say, if it's good for the baba, it will be good for the head. If it's good for the head, it will be good for the baba and the clipper as well. So we need to create an environment. What have INEC bothered to clean up? Because they're also Nigerians. Nobody working in INEC is a mercenary or brought from an expatriate. We're all Nigerians. Even when the argument is that 80% of INEC officials you find in the voting pools or during voting election days are not INEC officials. They are ad hoc. But they are still ad hoc staff of INEC. So INEC, as you are preparing to clean up your voters before 2027 election, clean up the electoral process, clean up the electoral environment. Because it's not going to happen in isolation. You're going to conduct the election in Nigeria. Are you going to conduct the election in Borno states where a lot of people are being killed, and those communities, are they out of Nigerian system or is it? Are you going to conduct the election in Benue and all those places where people are being killed, in Zamfara, in Kwara, in Benue? Will election hold in Yawata? What happened to the voters register of people of Yawata and all the Kajuri people in Kaduna State, and all the recently, the name of that community in Kwara, where the worst happened recently and nobody's talking about it. And INEC has just come out. Why are we thinking and talking? Because one thing leads to another. Are we going to, the house will not collapse, and we're thinking about the roof standing. So INEC, the democratic system. But democracy in Nigeria cannot survive when killings and abductions and rape and murder, mass murder is taking place, and want to play it out. I'm sure that the federal government of Nigeria spend money, almost what is very near budget of INEC, to begin to clean up Nigerian image abroad, to say whether killings are happening, whether you call it genocide, mass killing, whether Christians or Muslims, whoever is being killed. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm discussing and thinking and talking here is INEC to clean up voter register before 2007. And that is usual. Go ahead, clean up. But do remember that, one thing will lead to another. When it is good for the head, it will be good for the clipper. and even the barber. All of them work together. Like the Bible says, everything works together. And for those who works together, for those who love God, they also work together for those who hate God and those who hate Nigeria. So let's think about all of them together. Let us clean up the whole system so that everybody will work clean. And then the INEC will not come at last and stoop on the shit where some people have messed up the environment will sit down. As INEC is planning to clean up, some political parties have started electronic registration, asking for sensitive data of Nigerian populace. What are they going to do with it after this election? Where will those data be? Who will handle them? What of when the parties begin to split and they have splitters, and just like one of the parties are struggling who will occupy their national office in Abuja? If they had done e-registration, who will be in control of the data they will get? When you want people to register for a party in Nigeria, you ask for their VIN number, voter identification number, ask of their national identity number, ask of their bank identity number. What can't you ask for? You're asking for everything because you want them to see. Are we planning another rigging? This is a data theft for whoever is handling it. What is constitutional about it? Is it not data theft? Because you are using one thing, you pull up everybody. Well, I'm thinking and talking, and people will say, that's what I think, I don't know what I'm right, but you are the judge. You are there. Think on your own and add up to what I'm thinking and talking. The next thing we are going to talk about today is about ENUGU court fines British government £450 million. Ego Eliza. For the killing of coal miners in 1949 in ENUGU, the coal city. ENUGU is known as the coal city. In 1949, can you quickly do the mathematics? And some people came from different villages and communities in South is centered in ENUGU, where the business of coal mine is the hottest. Then it was NNPC. It was the mining sector of Nigeria. It should be what it was then. No. So now they were killed by the colonial masters who felt that they should die for disobeying them. So you find out that impunity did not start today. In Nigeria, when protesters say, we do not like the condition, and then the colonial masters gave order and said, you can deal with them, handle them. So the colonial masters, and we remember the British colonized Nigeria, and the number of coal miners in ENUGU killed in 1949 remain on record and still haunting the British government. When we remember our colonial masters, somebody whose grandparents died during the protest in ENUGU of coal miners, what were they asking for? Improve on our welfare. If we entered underground under ENUGU hot climate to go and mine out the coal, which was the black gold then, and then because we disagree on welfare, what will be our own, they were killed. And now, salute the courage of ENUGU Corps, all the people who have processed that thing to sue the colonial master. They have to pay the families of the people they killed 450 million British pounds. That is huge. And when say huge, what did I say? What can British government pay those families to make up for the families, for the life of those lost? But there's one thing that is very clear about this. When you think and talk about it, it means that Okulu Chezo, some people will say, what is this man talking about? When you talk, you can forget, but the person you told will remember. Those who killed the miners in ENUGU in 1949 may have died and gone. Even their grandparents would have been in a position and they still be there, even in US and in UK, big positions occupying. That's if. But then, how many years after, the people of ENUGU, whose people were killed in that crash, I said, you have to pay us 450 million. Not even because they said, they went to court to sue. And the court of competent jurisdiction in ENUGU has slammed British government, despite the fact that they are a colonial master. He said, whether in Igbo land, if you ask the traditional ruler is a booger man, he's doing head like this, nobody talk to me. Once in a while, you carry basket and cover your face and tell him, what you did is wrong. So the British government or the people who represented you or your ally who came to Southeast Nigeria, colonized Nigeria, killed our grandparents or great-great-grandparents during 1949 coal mine massacre in ENUGU. We are asking for compensation, and the court has slammed it and made it legitimate. So we are waiting for that thing to be paid. And somebody said, he said, hey, some of you will do it. Can they pay or not pay? British government have assets in Nigeria worth more than 450 million US pounds. That's my reminder. A barrister just told us that one on air. He said whether they pay or they have, because what you have in Nigeria is more than 450 million pounds. So you decide which one is. So let Nigerian people in high authorities, all the wickedness we are perpetuating out of impunity in Nigeria can come back to haunt Nigeria in many, many years to come. I've talked about it in different platforms. When we keep killing people, some of their children, offsprings will remain. And someday history will be told about how your great-great-grandchildren died. It's even the Igbos that taught us as black people how to trace our ancestry. If you start tracing your ancestry, you come to a point where it halts. You say, how did this man die? He was killed by bandits. He was abducted by terrorists. He was killed by Nigerian government. He was killed by British government, the American government. He was deported by Trump. And then it turned out to be in government and the Americans in Nigeria. Then Nigeria may be doing well then. He said, I'm the president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. British government or American government deported my parents. I'm going to deport all the Americans in Nigeria. Let's look at it. It's a circle of life. So turn by turn. And when it's your turn, you have your own pound of flesh. But can we exist? How long can we continue in sin and grace will abound? That is what the Bible asks. And I'm expecting the British government who killed the coal miners in ENUGU to answer. Do we remain in the circle of killing people when they protest? Even in Nigeria, some protesters have been bombed with the tear gas, and some of them died and lost their life, even when their houses were destroyed in Owerri Shoki and Makoko in Lagos. And some workers in Abuja went to protest and they were threatened to go to court to be jailed, and set the army and the police against them. It happened even when the traders said we will not trade in Onitsha market. The governor said he must trade by force, close the market, and they started protesting, and some people even lost their life and their properties. Then will they forget? What will make them forget? For how soon will they forget? Will it come back to haunt us in the future? The impunity we displace without minding people. It takes two to tango. It takes the electorate and the people they elected to be in a democracy. That's all I can think and talk on that topic. The next thing is shoot at sight. Bayo Onanuga, the presidential aide, ordered that anybody found vandalizing government property, there was a particular, those rail, expensive, heavy rail metals they used to construct Nigerian road. He said, you catch anybody, shoot at sight. The question has been, beautiful order, wonderful thing. After all, you can always, when you have that smelly thing they call, human beings drop. If you're smelling too much, you only carry sand to cover it. You will stop smelling. That's a good one from Onanuga. The questions are coming. The order has been given. Now, the question that we are thinking and talking, why has Bayo Onanuga not given orders for any bandit or terror caught to be shot at sight? Why has Bayo Onanuga not given orders that any Nigerian politician found as corrupt with a lot of money in possession should be shot at sight? Why has Bayo Onanuga not given orders that those who are doing us, that so many things, atrocities being committed in Nigeria, that we should have shoot at sight, and then we begin to solve this problem. And that's it. But the question is, Does Bayo Onanuga have the right, legal, constitutional, by position or otherwise, to issue such orders? Is he also part of impunity, using impunity to cure impunity? I don't know whether he use impunity to cure impunity. And that is one of the questions we should answer. And ask, and as we ask and think and talk, we demand an answer. Bayo Onanuga is a presidential spokesman. Did the president give such orders for Bayo Onanuga as a spokesperson to issue the order